Here we are on a Monday. Hope everybody is doing all right. Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi
And Joe Rayo here on a
on
Monday.
on the
Yes,
Joe,
yes.
on the Joe,
On the Joe and Joe show.
or something.
J and J.
We wrote it down somewhere. Hold on. Where'd you go?
I don't know.
There you
I'm still
go. Okay, no, I'm sorry. I just had. I'm clicking the mouse too fast.
yeah.
So, I want to go back to Saturday for a moment. First off, what'd you get?
2.9 inches, which was duly reported to our friends at Upton, the National Weather Service Forecast Office. It lasted, Joe, here exactly 8 hours, never changed over or mixed with any kind of ice, sleet, or plain rain. It was snow from start to finish, and if you average it all out, it came out to be about a little over a third of an inch per hour up here.
And I had pretty much the same 2.9 inches
Really?
here on the North Shore. There were some cold pockets. I happened to be in one of them, and we same thing. I mixed, and maybe at the very end for about 10 or 15 minutes, it went to very light rain, and then it just shut off. I think by
Hmm.
about 9:30 it was done. The
Right.
the interesting thing about Saturday was just in review, and I was trying to figure out, you know, just exactly what was going on because we had that really odd uh, that arm that moved through early in the afternoon, and it caused that burst of snow that put down a coating to as much as an inch in some places, and then it moved out. But and we were talking about that all late last week when you did when we pulled up the frontogenesis map and we showed the omega going
Right.
through. I was talking to Alan Casper about it, and he may be watching again tonight. We hope he is. Um, but apparently, because when that burst went through in New Jersey, where he was, the wind suddenly picked up to 20 to 25 miles an hour, and then it dropped off, which kind of sounded a bit odd. I'm not doubting Izab. Izab is correct because when I looked around at a few other places, the same thing happened. That southwest wind, as that burst went through, kicked up. And he pointed out that if you looked on some of the more detailed radars, it looked like there were these little convective swirls in there that developed, which for some reason this winter we're seeing these convective bursts going on in some of these. We saw them in the snow squalls, and now we saw it with this on Saturday. And I wonder. The other thing that happened with that little arm that went through, in a lot of places, it dropped the temperature down by 3 to 5 degrees,
Right.
and I think that was very important with what followed later in the afternoon. It slowed the warm up down, and it bought some folks, I think, an extra few hours of snow, which ultimately it put down what it put down. But it was very interesting how that all played out.
It's interesting that Alan Casper mentioned about the little convective swirls because I think you and I were talking the day before, a couple of days before, using the Frontogenesis 700
Yeah, I
millibar.
just I just said that.
Whether or not
I
whether or not
could
that
bring
might
I
be
could bring that map back up. By the way, I think I can still pull it up off of tropical tidbits.
whether or not there might be a little rumble or two of thunder as that line came rolling on through. It didn't quite have that much of a thump to it, but still, it's interesting that Alan took note of that. And you're right. Where I was up here, the snow began at 1:20 p.m. Just as we were actually finishing off our special Joe and Joe Saturday show, and it was 23 degrees. But then when the snow really started to fall with earnest at a steady pace, we dropped 3 degrees and went down to 20, and we pretty much stayed at or just above 20 through a good part of the storm. But then we bumped right back up into the upper 20s by let's say 8 o'clock. By 11 o'clock, we was 32 degrees here,
Yeah.
And when I woke up the next morning, it was 38 degrees. Eventually, yesterday, we peaked at 42, which really helped in getting rid of a lot of the snow.
Oh, except in shaded areas here, it's all gone. There's still some in places that have shade. And I just brought back the GFS from Friday when that frontal genesis line moved on through. At least I'm trying to know. Hold on, let me roll back. There we go. Hang on. There it is. So this is on the 700. I got the 18Z map. Uh, in fact, let me see if I can pull up a better example of this. Because let's go to Saturday. I'll go to Saturday morning straight up. Yeah, so you can see it here pretty well. Get the pen up. I guess I'm a little slow on the uptake tonight, Joan. Just give me 1 second. Make sure everybody can see it, and they can. So this is what we were talking about Friday night. This area in here, where you see those closed purple lines, that area moved east. That was the arm that moved through early in the afternoon, and it held together enough. It did what it did, which was effectively to knock the temperatures down. You can see it here at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just kind of lying right in there. And it was a very narrow band. The main precip area was still back in Pennsylvania, and that came in uh, after about 3 or 4 o'clock. And then, of course, that first arm just kept on moving. And as you said, Joe, yeah, we were in the 40s all day yesterday. It was a nice day. The wind took its time picking up, and then finally the cold air came in last night and this morning when we were down in the teens. And I don't even think we didn't even get it out of the 20s where I am today.
No, it was cold all through the course of the day. To show you how cold it was, my wife, who usually likes to go out and either do some shopping or just look around the property or whatever, she didn't take one step outside today. She said it's too cold. I'm staying inside. So that's pretty much what we did for your Martin Luther King Day today, was just simply stay indoors and so forth.
Yeah, I had ventured out a few times today, but it was tough. So going forward, at least the weather tonight is pretty quiet. I'm going to bring up a couple of maps first. Starting off, at least as just in a quick review from what happened on Saturday. And of course, Joe, you keep an eye on the chat in case we have any questions. And if we don't get to your question on the chat, when we come back later on the double screen, you can go ahead and put your question up again. But you don't need to do it multiple times. So this was the snowfall for the actual snowfall that occurred. You can see the southern edge of a coating to an inch down from just north of Toms River to just north of Philadelphia. Philadelphia has zero point 0.3 inches of snow for the whole winter, by the
Wow.
way.
Wow.
And back across southern Pennsylvania. And then you get to the darker blues. This is 2 inches that fell. New York City, I believe, is now at 4.8. So we will not have the least snowiest or the second least snowiest winter on record. We're working on maybe the third least snowiest winter on record. I think it's 5 point something. I want to say sometime in the late 90s, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't remember. And you see, Joe, there's this darker blue that's running right along the north shore of Long Island. That's what I was in. That's that little cold pocket I was talking about. And then you
Yeah.
see the three. It was generally a 3 to 4 inch snowfall, even up through the middle part of the Hudson Valley up to Albany and just north and west. Boston got on this map has they're in the 3 inch range, and north and west of Boston got about 4 or maybe a little bit more. And then you got to some higher amounts of 4 to 8 inches up through New Hampshire, Vermont, and on up through Maine. Some of what you see in western New York and southwestern New York with these 8 to 12 amounts, some of that's lake effect driven, so it's hard to separate at this stage of the game. It's just it's hard for us to separate uh, what fell from the system and what fell from the lake effect. But that was that. It's the biggest snow for us in the month of January and the biggest snow of the winter so far.
I was just happy that the snowblower started up. It had been like 46 straight days, and I actually did start it up at the end of the year, or at the end of December, just to get it going and make sure that everything was just right. But it's been amazing that now you said zero point 0.3 inches in Philadelphia. Washington and Baltimore have had more snow than that, haven't they?
Yes, yeah, they have.
So Philly, the city of friendship, of brotherly love, is like in a snow hole this year, or at least
Well, you know, when you look at the climate with Philadelphia, that actually is a snow hole, a long-term snow hole because they're kind of in a funny spot. There's two snow holes that I found over the years looking at numbers. One is in southeast Pennsylvania, and the other one is in eastern Connecticut. And that has to do with the fact of how storms come out. If they come up from the west or southwest and they're on the other side of the Appalachians, sometimes the snow dries up before it gets over to the other side. Oftentimes, when storms redevelop off the off the coast of Delaware and New Jersey, Philadelphia is too far south and west to tap that development, whereas New York, to a greater extent, Boston, in a better position to tap the development. Long Island oftentimes participates in that. So they're kind of in this sort of odd spot where they miss out on events for one reason or another. In the meantime, just looking at the satellite tonight, I got the Sandwich RGB, which combines the infrared with as it says here, infrared band 13 with visual band 3. So it's kind of a mix of the visible and the infrared. I like it because you can get to see the higher cloud tops as well as the lower clouds. And we're clear here pretty much along the coast. There's still a little bit of cloud cover well to the north and west and in and around the lakes. You can see some of the rotation there going on in a few places, but very little in the way of any precip is going on. In the west, you're starting to see that high-level moisture coming in off the Pacific, streaming into the west, and that's going to be the next weather system that doesn't get here until Saturday. So we're going to be dry and quiet pretty much all week long.
Robert Brown just asked a question on the chat board. He says, I have a question. When the weather modelers make the future models, do they incorporate the past snow depth totals?
I don't know how. I'm not 100% sure of that. However, in something related to it, I saw someone on one of the weather chat, one of the weather groups in Facebook. Hang on a second. I'm switching maps here and I'm losing control. I'm trying to find one particular map. There we go. That wasn't the one. All right. You know what?
Do the hot dogs make you lose control, Joe?
I'll be nice. And by the way, I have the watches and warnings map up, which is as quiet as can be, except for the Pacific Northwest. But going back to Robert's question, something related to that, and I'll throw this out at you, Joe. See what you think about it. So a few people have been kind of commenting about the volatility of the models this winter, and it seems that we've seen more volatility over the last couple of years growing in these weather models, especially when it comes to the long range. And even in the medium range, they have been they've been doing weird things. And he made the point is if you argue that let's get into the subject of climate change. That's not where I'm getting at here. But if you accept the fact that the climate is shifting or has shifted to an extent, that perhaps the algorithms that they use that look at past weather maybe aren't working the same way as they otherwise would. You understand what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, well, that's what do we call MOS? Model output statistics based upon long-term averages, at least long-term in weather parlance is 30 years. And indeed, if things have been shifting around a bit, mixing up the deck, so to speak, that may throw a little bit of a monkey wrench when they run these models forward, and they just don't fall into place with the way that they used to.
Yeah, so they probably that data does have some impact, no doubt. Here's the radar tonight. A little bit of lake effect coming off of Lake Erie in and around the Cleveland area. And by the way, one of my snowplow guys who's in Southwest PA, in and around Johnstown. This morning, the radar wasn't showing very much, if anything at all, going on as lake effect, but there was actually snow that happened today, and it probably was, low top stuff that even the radar wasn't picking up in terms of lake effect. So that does happen sometimes, that some of the stuff goes undetected.
Right.
The West right now seeing some rain coming into parts of Southern California between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and we've got some precip coming into Washington State along the coast. But you look across the U.S., it is pretty quiet. So uh, let's move on to Saturday, because that's going to be the first weather system that's going to come in. I think the pattern's going to get active. Well, the pattern, we're getting this dry stretch this week, but it does look like an active pattern as we go into next weekend and then beyond that. And the first thing I want to bring up is WPC's snowfall probability of at least a quarter of an inch of liquid. This is for Sunday, and it has the southern edge of 10%, the 10% line. I'm trying to, my colors are off here. Hang on one second, Joe. Let me just make sure I'm looking at, yeah, okay. The 10 to 30%. So the southern edge of 10% is touching New York City and southern Connecticut, but a 30 to 50% chance of at least a quarter of an inch of accumulating snow in northwest Jersey, northeastern Pennsylvania, north of Allentown, and then up the Hudson Valley west of the Hudson. And I'm wondering whether this is because of the fact that we're not going to have a whole lot of cold air here going into this weekend. This almost looks like an elevation-driven type snow that we may be setting up for Saturday for upstate New York and for New England, and perhaps also for Pennsylvania.
Well, interestingly, but for my subjective temperature outlook for Saturday for the lower Hudson Valley, an average 42 degrees Saturday afternoon. That, of course, would mean rain. But as we went into Saturday night, I came up with a 29-degree temperature. I said, oh, wait a minute now, working everything out here. 29, that would suggest that there'd be some kind of mixing in parts of the Hudson Valley. Actually, those who went on my Facebook page and took a look at the forecast I posted, I actually said for Saturday night 33. I said I don't want to start complicating things by saying rain could mix with or change to sleet and snow Saturday night. I just simply pushed it up to just above freezing for Saturday night. And I said we'll take a look. We'll take a closer look at the Saturday night scenario a little bit later on in the week, because yeah, it might in some areas, and you're right, the elevation certainly could play a role, that we could see some places, especially high elevation places in the Hudson Valley, and of course northwestern Jersey, see a little bit of a mixture of sleet or ice or even wet snow after a rather rainy, dank day on Saturday. Not and Saturday, Joe, I think the rain, whatever we do get of rain, probably won't enter the picture until after sometime early afternoon. So once again, as was the case this past Saturday, where we told everybody, if you have anything to do, get on out and do it Saturday morning, because the snow is probably not going to begin until sometime midday, early afternoon. That could be a repeat this coming Saturday. Only this coming Saturday will be a lot warmer, and the first precip shot will be of the wet, not the white variety.
Big high sitting in Iowa right now. This is very cold air that covers from the plains into the Northeast. This is some of the very cold air that's been sitting up in Canada. It's not really the true Arctic air, because that is locked up further to the north. And this is one of the parts of the equation for the weekend with regards to the Northeast, the interior Northeast anyway, where we'll have to keep an eye on cold air in southern Canada later Saturday or Saturday night as this low develops and starts to move our way. That you could see some of that cold air bleed southward. But with all this cold air around, you would think that this snow would not, the snow rain debate would not even be on the table here. But this high is going to be moving out starting Wednesday, and we are going to see temperatures moderate back up into the 40s for Thursday and Friday. It's actually another high building down from Canada that is going to perhaps bring that cold air that you mentioned for later Saturday and Saturday night. And by the way, WPC on their 7-day forecast actually is fairly bullish in terms of precip amounts for Saturday into Saturday night, Saturday into Saturday night, showing what looks like anywhere between the half-inch line up to about Albany. It looks like an inch to maybe an inch and a quarter down along the coast. If we don't, it may wind up being a very raw, rainy Saturday into Saturday night with this system. It would be an absolutely miserable day if this winds up verifying. And by the way, tons of precip up in the northwest, so we're still getting systems coming in from the Pacific that are going to be moving across, and that's for the longer term.
Yeah, it's been pretty active out in the Pacific Northwest, and we just watch these systems as they come crashing into the Pacific coast. And generally speaking, they take about 3.5 to 4 days to finally get to the eastern seaboard. So what we're seeing right now, if you go by that law, it's a generalization. Be Friday, but this system is going to be digging on down into the southern states and then looping on up. So take another day or so to get up here, but it looks like we probably get through this week, all of this week, at least here, without any worries from any kind of precipitation.
Yeah, I've got the 500 millibar map, so we could take a look at the winds, the wind flow, and what's going on in the upper atmosphere. And it's it's very interesting how we have this, fairly active Pacific with all these weather systems that are moving along, and there's clearly a southern part of this jet stream. In fact, there's going to be a trough that's swinging around now in the east that's going to make a storm well off the southeast coast between the Bahamas and Bermuda. You think this was hurricane season to have it that far south, but it's all part of the plot here going forward, because then the system behind it is going to take a bit more of a southern route, at least initially. But the problem with this jet stream, Joe, is if you look, you've got that southern jet, then you've got this jet in Canada that's sort of rolling along with that Canadian air. And further north is where your Arctic air is all trapped up around Greenland, northernmost Canada, over the North Pole, and then back over to Siberia. Some of that is bleeding into northern Canada, but the real cold air is way up. And as a result, we're sort of on the edge here with that Canadian jet. And if you're a snow lover, what you want to see is one of these short waves here just kind of moving by in the north, staying completely separate, and creating higher pressures eventually in eastern Canada, in Quebec, and hoping that low-level cold air were to bleed down, because the southern part of the jet stream is going to try to shoot the systems out underneath us. It may not succeed, but it does seem like it wants to try to do that with this next system for Saturday. And then if we go out even further, you're going to notice that there's more energy coming into the west, and here comes another one right behind it for maybe the middle part of next week. That may play out the same way as this one does. And then, of course, as we always know, the model has to have the obligatory look from, say, 320 hours on, that we're going to get into a winter pattern again with a deep trough in the east. It does this every single run, and it never, ever gets inside the 10-day time frame. And even this look, while much colder, by the end of the forecast period, you still have this problem with, all the polar vortex being way up in Canada. You get an extension of it down into eastern Canada, kind of like a well-developed breakaway low. It gives you a shot of fairly cold air at the end of the period, if this even verifies. But my approach right now is just to kind of ignore whatever's going on in the longer term, and just sort of stay focused on the next week, because otherwise you're going to drive yourself crazy. But if you take a look at the GFS, here's the problem for Saturday. So you've got this system that's swinging out from the west. A low forms down, actually down in Louisiana. There's also another low that's going to be up near in northern Missouri or somewhere up there on the northern part of this, which is reflecting some of the upper air energy. It's going to try to swing eastward and then just sort of redevelop, uh, just like a number of them have, somewhere over Delaware or southern New Jersey. This one just kind of rides right along the coast, and then it gets energized Saturday night. So this is where you've got the model kind of creating some what looks like some elevation-driven snows back up. Whoops, let me clean up this map. But you get these elevation snows that get happen up in upstate New York. The high to the north, right in here. There's this big high up in Quebec.
Yeah.
You got to get some of that. You got to get some of that cold air to bleed southward if you want to see any kind of frozen precipitation down to the coastline. And I don't know that this one is strong enough than some of the others we've seen up there.
Well, sometimes, and we're what? We're still like 5 or 6 days away. Sometimes the models, with each passing run, make these cold highs up over Canada a bit stronger.
We
And
saw that late last week.
yeah, and by the time we get to Thursday or Friday, hey, it might be just cold enough, and the cold air oozing, if I may use that term, or bleeding southward just enough to set the stage for, again, possibly a mix of ice or sleet or snow, if not down by the coastal plain, but perhaps in elevated areas inland. So we'll see.
This run of the GFS, Joe, actually has it starting as snow for you, believe it or not. I'm not putting anything on the table in terms of a forecast, but just to give you the tight view, it actually has northern New Jersey to just north of New York City at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It has a leading edge of snow north of Albany. I don't know how much of that. What's the better view is going to be the radar view. Let's see what the radar view has on this.
I suspect the
There it
column.
is. There it is. Actually, it's got you in some dark blue snow there.
Well, I suspect the column might actually be very cold, perhaps aloft, but it's going to be again. What's it going to be like in the last, couple of 1,000 feet or last 1,000 feet or so down to the ground or down to the surface? Hey, it could very well be, and you usually see this more like in March or even early April. These big, fat, doily-shaped flakes. They come
Yes.
on down. They don't accumulate to any degree, but that we might see something like that in this chilly, raw kind of air mass that could be over us on Saturday. We'll see.
Whenever you see the GFS model, especially this time of year, when you see these little green blotches where it's supposed to be theoretically cold enough for snow, like you have up right now showing up in, come on, and work for me. Okay, so you see that little green. Oh boy, this thing don't want to work for me today for some reason. Oh boy, let's try this again.
Technology, Joe.
Yeah, I know, it's so sad, isn't it? Yeah, I cannot get my
And just
pen.
remember, Alan back 30, 40 years ago was working with a grease pen and a plexiglass map.
Oh, okay, I got it to work now. I accidentally knocked the transparency down. Okay, so there you go. Whenever you see these little green blotches that show up inside the precipitation shield, that's usually when you only have you have a limited amount of cold air, and it's oftentimes in situations like systems like this that they wind up being elevation driven snows, and you get these weird snowfall profiles when it's done, where folks that are up at 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet get clobbered, and anybody underneath that winds up with very little. So this again, I think, exemplifies the fact that there's just not a whole lot of cold air. And by Sunday morning, actually has the low near Bridgeport in southern Connecticut, and Sunday afternoon it's sitting right over Islip. If you
Right.
could, if you could wind up forcing this to go more offshore to the south, and then maybe you might stand a chance to bring the rain snow line a bit further to the south. But right now, I would view that as a long shot. I think you're right what you said, though. Let's pay attention to what the strength of that high, because as we get closer, models sometimes miss out on how strong those cold highs to the north actually are.
Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen that over and over again. The first time I ever saw the was ever taught the importance of keeping an eye on the high to our north was Easter Sunday, 1970, where and this was March the 29th, 1970, and the day before, the 28th, I remember listening to CBS News Radio 88 back then, not 880, and Gordon Barnes, who was the chief meteorologist on CBS, both television and radio back then, kept telling everybody, I don't like the looks of that high. For all of you making big Easter plans, that high could be colder and it could mean, more of a winter. We all woke up the next morning. Holy mackerel. We had like 4 inches in New York City and 12 inches up in the lower Hudson Valley. Really a fairly unexpected event because, again, of the strength of that high. A lot of people have their eyes on the low, Joe, the storm system, and they fail to take into account or fail to concentrate on the high. Sometimes it's the high that's more important than the storm itself if you want to see snow.
You can see it on the map for Saturday afternoon, that 1026H that's up in Quebec. What if that turns out to be a 1032 or a 1034 high? That might be enough to push down some of that colder air, forcing this thing to be a little further south. I mean, that's at the moment now. We're just kind of looking at this as sort of grabbing out at possibilities and instances where we've seen that happen in the past. But it would really have to come together. I would view it as a long shot. But let's see what happens when we come back. When we're doing this tomorrow, maybe we'll get a better picture. Models love to dance around, and I don't think we're going to have a real good sense of this until we get to about Wednesday or Thursday. Meanwhile, after that goes out, the next system gets ready to move. And on this particular run, we have the model making a bit of a powerhouse moving up the East Coast for the last day of January. But of course, that's down at day 10 or 11, and we know that when when the next model cycle runs, that's going to come in a bit differently. So I'm going to come back to us at this point, since we don't really have a whole lot happening tonight.
Yeah, it's amazing that
very
we don't
quiet,
have
very quiet.
It's amazing we don't have a whole heck of a lot to talk about, and yet we have 208 people who are watching.
Well, great. So you know what? Let's see if you can answer tonight's Jeopardy answer. Are you ready?
Is this from Scott?
It's Scott Briller, the Jeopardy answer for tonight. Let me just get it. Hang on 1 second. I have to find it. And of course, I should have preloaded it, but then of course I'm moving maps around and juggling things around left and right. Come on, load. This is just insane. All right, for some reason now it doesn't want to load. So let's try it another way. And hang on. I'll find it.
Do you realize I'm looking at, I'm just for the heck of it, on YouTube. I went for the, maybe to play it in the background here, the Final Jeopardy theme song.
You better be careful in case it's copyrighted. Probably is.
On YouTube, somebody has posted the Jeopardy theme song, 10 hours of the Jeopardy theme song.
Looped the song?
Looped the song for
10 hours?
10 hours.
It's 30, each section is 30 seconds. Oh my God, that's insane. Okay, here we go. The final Jeopardy answer is, the category is 12-inch snowstorms in Central Park. Okay?
Right.
The answer is, since 1869, Central Park has had 28 storms of at least 12 inches. How many since 2000? How many since 2000?
How many was the total since 1869?
The total since 1869
right.
is hold on a second. It's 28.
So
Uh,
we've had okay. So
okay,
Central
28
Park
since 1869.
28 since 1869, and you want to
This
know
this is the right.
how many have hit or exceeded 12 inches since 2000
Correct. In Central Park.
in Central Park? I would
Okay.
okay. I would say we've had a lot of big storms over the years in the last 20 years. I would say I would say 10.
You are correct.
10?
I hope you wagered everything you have. It is 10, yes. Now I will tell you this, for Long Island, it's higher. For Long Island, it's probably closer to 15.
That's well, you ought to know. You had that 34-inch mammoth
Yeah, among
snowmageddon
others.
years
But
ago.
there were a number of events that produced 12-inch plus, a number of storms in this 20-year stretch. Where I said, New York City got 8 or 9 or 7, and I'm up out here with 13, 14, 15. In one case, 24. Actually, more than one case. It might have been two cases that I got 24. But yeah, east of New York City, out on Long Island, there have been a number of insane snowstorms in the last 20 years.
But this is
But that's very good. You got that. That's excellent.
But this is crazy. 151 years worth of records, 28 12-inch snowstorms at Central Park, an average of one every 5.3 years. So that means that in the last 20 years, we should not have gotten more than four, and
Correct.
yet we got 10.
Correct.
Incredible.
If you reduce that 12 to 10, okay, if you reduce the number to the 12 base to 10, then I think it works out to more like one every 3 years for a
Right,
10-inch snowstorm. And
right.
by the way, it's not unusual to go 1970 through 1977, 7-year drought. 1984 to I don't remember if the New York City got 10 inches in the superstorm of 93. I may have, but you certainly went from 84 to 93 without a 10-inch snowstorm. And if that didn't happen, then you have to really push it to 96.
Right.
So that's 13 years. I mean, that's a huge stretch. And the one stat on that always stunned me was Chicago. Okay, Chicago went from 1979, okay, which was a very big winter for them, one of the coldest and snowiest they've ever had.
The mayor lost his job in 79
Right.
because he couldn't plow away the snow fast enough.
It wasn't until 1997 that they had another 1 foot plus snowstorm in Chicago. So they went from the winter of 79-80 until whenever it happened in early 1997. So that's almost 18 years.
Well, also remember
And that's Chicago, where their average snowfall for the season is 10 inches higher than it is for New York.
And 1967, they had a mammoth snowfall, something like 20 something inches in Chicago. And I don't think they had anywhere near that from 67 to that memorable snow and cold year of 79. So that's another 12 years right there.
Yeah, these things, when they happen, they come in bunches, and then when they don't happen, you go through these long drought periods. So uh, the, the big snowstorm is no guarantee in any 1 or 2 or 3 winters. As you
Right.
said, it's more like every 4 or 5. Oh boy, the
We'd like to
world,
thank
the
we'd like to
sad
thank
world we
Izzy.
live in.
We'd like to thank Izzy D for contributing tonight 99 cents.
Yes, thank you. The one thing I want to correct from Friday on the live stream, or Saturday, whenever I mentioned about my library appearance, Scott Briller pointing out my inability to remember days of the week, and I'm really getting bad at this. So it's actually Tuesday, February 4th at 2 o'clock at the Sachem Library in Holbrook, New York. So you can contact the Sachem Library online and let them know if you're going to come. But I'll bring it up from time to time again. Nice to see everybody on board tonight.
Wait a minute, it's 2 o'clock. on a Tuesday afternoon?
Yes, it's a 2, and I'm not going to live stream it. So you have to be there or be square. And then I'll do my regular live stream at 7. We'll do the regular live stream at 7 o'clock.
I did the calculation just a couple of days ago. I don't have the exact. February 4th is going to be the midpoint of winter. There's a very auspicious thing for you to.
Oh, wow.
It'll be at 11. The midpoint is at something like 11:12 a.m. So literally just a couple of hours after we reach the midpoint is when you'll be giving your talk and at the Sachem Library.
By the way, I can see the chat board now, so you guys want to put up some, if you've got questions, throw them up now, so we can address them. Yes, now Chris Alley, yeah, you can't get elevation snow. You're 3 feet above sea level. I'm thinking you've got a problem. Joe Lopresti, I don't know. I thought I saw a question that you put up, and I was about to read it, and then all of a sudden my chat board just flew out of control, and I was not able to see it. So if you do have a question, just put it up there right now. By the way, our forecast on Saturday actually worked out pretty well.
I think so. I think we did very, very well. In fact, the highest snow total it was, I think, somewhere in Dutchess County, one of the higher elevations. And to get that snow total, you have to go to the National Weather Service in Albany. But I saw one place that got 6 inches of snow out of the storm on Saturday. But most everybody else, Joe, seemed to have gotten somewhere in the 2 to 4 inch bracket, which pretty much is what we were suggesting for a couple of days, even a couple of days in advance.
Beryl Rakin wants to know if there's any chance of seeing snow this weekend in New York City. Well, I'm going to tell you this, Beryl. You're going to have that big high to the north get really big. It's actually not that big of a high. You're going to need to get it a lot bigger than it's being modeled now. And you're going to have to get that cold air to try to bleed southward. And the low track has to be forced further to the south. So you got a lot of things here that need to happen. Will the weather patterns change, Danilo Evangelista? They have. The only problem is, Danilo, is that as I have often stated, the pattern change you want and the pattern change you get may not necessarily be the same thing. And unfortunately, we seem to have gone from a pattern that was absolutely terrible for snow that to one where it's not. Let's say it's less terrible. It's a different pattern now that we have than what we had. The problem is that both patterns that we are dealing with here are not conducive to snowfall in the urban corridor from Washington to Boston unless everything were to time out absolutely perfectly. And that is something that you don't even know until maybe the day before it's happening. Lord Kate wants us to talk about the blizzard of 16.
The blizzard of 16?
Yes. I can.
You mean 2016?
Of 2016.
I thought he was talking about 1916.
But all right, you know what? Hang on. Hold on, Lord Kate. Hang on. I just want to get to Mark Gladfelter's question. What do I think Central PA for Saturday? Now, here's the thing, Mark. For PA, for Pennsylvania, this could be one of those situations where elevation is going to be important as you go into the western part of the state, but particularly the northern part of the state where elevation reigns. So I would maybe pay a bit of attention there because the cold air might get a bit more involved in your particular area, and certainly WPC is showing that when we had that the probability of at least 1/4 of an inch of liquid falling as either snow or sleet. How does the Madden-Julian oscillation play into everything? Asked Joe Lopresti. One of these nights, I'll show you what it looks like, what the whole thing looks like with the Madden-Julian oscillation. I can't do it now because I have to find where they are on the internet and put them up on the screens. But basically, the Madden-Julian oscillation is wind patterns in the Indian Ocean and how they come off of Asia and India, and they drive tropical activity in that part of the world. There are certain phases. There are 8 phases that have been identified. 4 of them are warm for the eastern part of the United States. 4 of them are cold. for the eastern part of the United States. Then there's what's called, Joe, the circle of death. When it goes into the circle of death. So the thing with these, the thing about these really kind of broad technical things that are going on in the atmosphere when you talk about the long range to remember is they have to couple with what's happening. Sometimes you get these things in phases that say it's supposed to be warm in the east or it's supposed to be cold in the east based on the phase. But if the activity that's going on in the Indian Ocean doesn't ripple across the Pacific and then doesn't ripple across North America, then it may not have impact. The polar vortex in the stratosphere, for example, sometimes it reaches down to the bottom of the atmosphere. Sometimes it doesn't. Last year, it split in two, which should have been favorable for cold and snow in the east. Guess what? Didn't translate. This year, it's positioned up over the North Pole and drifting towards Siberia, which would lock all the cold air up in that part of the world. Guess what? This time around, it is coupled, and it is having impact. So, uh, you know, all these little silver bullet clues that everybody looks at as trying to get an answer for the long term don't always work. Just bear that in mind.
And the just getting back before you started in on the Madden Julian oscillation, the question about the blizzard of 2016. The one thing that I remember about that particular storm is the fact that right here at the home base in Putnam Valley, we had about 11 inches of snow. 10 miles to the north of here, 10 miles, Joe, they had barely enough to cover the grass. A very, very sharp razor edge cutoff line between the heavy duty snow and hardly any snow at all.
I'm going to bring it up right now.
I also
and
remember,
I got clobbered from that.
and I also remember that Paul Cosin at the time was working at the hydrometeorological center in College Park, Maryland, writing the discussions for snow. He had that pegged, that particular blizzard, because there still was some uncertainty up until about a day or two before. Some of the models were going for, not all that much or whatever like that. And 2 days before, he said that this could be one of the really memorable storms. Even mentioning the blizzard of '96 in the same vein. At that time I couldn't really see it. So why is he saying things like this? And as it turned out, it was indeed just that for the tri-state area. It's just that again, a very very sharp northern cutoff, um, and people were complaining. A few people were complaining to me at that time, said, "Where's all the snow? Well, we hardly have enough to cover the
Right.
ground up here." And meanwhile, I'm getting clobbered with 11. You had what, like 15, 16 on Long
Something
Island?
like that, yeah. Here I got the surface map up, and you had your low down in northern Alabama and Georgia, but more importantly, you've got this banana high that's just wrapping around it, and that was the one. That was one of the few times that particular winter, because that was a strong El Nino winter. That's when the window opened up actually, this would have probably been considered in that particular winter. This was the January thaw. This is the maybe a 2 or 3 week period where the primary pattern uh, relaxed, and that low, you can see it here, coming up off the North Carolina coast. The high, just the cold high, wrapped around it, and it runs off eastern North Carolina, and then starts to slide to the east. It kind of pinwheeled back westward toward Delaware Bay, toward not too far from Delaware Bay, off of the coast of off the Delmarva Peninsula, and then it just kind of sat there. This is why it didn't lift all the way up; it just shut off, not too far from you. I think it was somewhere through Dutchess County, right, just north of Route 84. That it,
Yeah.
that it, and that's it. I mean, after that, it just went bye-bye, and that was the end. So it was that snow for many areas that winter was. enough to make it a normal snowfall winter. And for me, it was an above normal snowfall winter because I had another 10-inch snowfall in February from a coastal low that cut off back to about New York City. Go figure.
Yeah, it was a pretty wild storm, and wasn't that the one that brought the all-time heaviest snow amount, or am I mixing it up with another one to Central Park?
Yeah, it did. They kind of had to correct it, and they added the extra tenth of an inch to make it the record. Well, I remember there was a lot of folks screaming about that. It's a record. It's not a record. They got all worked up over it.
Yeah, but you really can't make comparisons. Well, I don't know how they did it back in 1947 when we had 25.4 inches from one single storm at Central Park. We do know, we have mentioned this before, that in the 60s and probably the 70s as well, they measured snow merely by stepping outside at 30 Rock and sticking the yardstick into on top of cars. Uh,
Some of those observations were my yardstick.
yeah,
Just so
yeah,
you know. Yeah, they just it was a time where you couldn't get to the park. They were short staffed, so they did what they had to do. But it does call some of the numbers in the 70s probably a bit on the low side, including I always thought the blizzard of 78 that they only had about a foot measured at Central Park.
something like that.
Yeah, I just didn't have that was definitely off a car top.
And in my house, meanwhile, in my house, I've made careful measurements, 22.2 inches in Throg's Neck for that storm.
Well, I,
Pretty,
I
pretty,
was just blocks away from you, so I would agree with that.
yeah,
I would definitely agree with that. And just the 78 storm, like the 96 storm, those are 2-day events. When they take that really classic uh, uh, look to them, where you get these big upper lows that swing that are swinging around with them. You get that big burst of snow from the warm air coming in, the warm air and the moisture coming in on the initial shot, and then you get the upper low snows on the backside, and you wind up stretching the snow event out to 36 hours. That's the thing I guess I most enjoyed was the longevity from start to finish of both those two storms.
yeah. The 78 storm was amazing. Started off as a piddling weak thing about 150 miles east of Elizabeth City, North Carolina, but the diving shortwave from the Great Lakes just literally came on down and said, in its own way, it grabbed onto that little storm and said, "Here, come to Papa," pulled the storm back toward the coast, and the surface and upper air low pressure systems actually became what we call vertical. Everything slowed down almost to a crawl, and the
Right.
storm ended up idling almost like a neutral gear just south of Montauk for about, I don't know, 12 or 18 hours. In fact, the people who do really micro scale, I've seen one guy who did the plotting, did like a literally a little teeny tiny semicircle south of Montauk, and then the storm finally moved on its way again off to the north
Well,
and east.
that's what they get the 40 to 50 inches amounts that they had over in Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts.
Right.
James Budd said long range models have been ridiculous in September, December. Cold in the long range disappears as times draw nearer. Split flow seems to always be bad for cold weather lovers. I would just say with regards to the split flow issue, there are instances where the split flow works. If you look at back in '78 in the week leading to January 19th, that was a split flow that worked. You had a strong enough Canadian flow coming down with cold air, and you had the southern part of the jet moving weather systems along. And I also think the winter of 93, 94 might be a good example to look at as a winter where a split flow worked well. Because in 93, 94, we basically, I remember right around February 1st, we didn't really get that much snow going into that, but right around February 1st, it turned into this bowling alley, and we got one low after another after another.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there were more than a dozen lows that went by in the subsequent in the 5 6 weeks that followed from February 1st. Each one produced not a whole lot of snow. There were two of them that gave me a foot on each one out here. And I told you the other once how after it was the first time after the second snowfall uh, got to 2 below 0. In fact, I think that's the last time Central Park hit -2. Um, uh, on When the second system was done, and it was the first time I ever saw freezing rain with a temperature of 12.
I remember there were the two storms. The two storms actually came within like 24 hours of each other. And I think the second storm was on a Friday, and combined they brought like an enormous, like 12 or 14 inches to much of the tri-state area.
Yeah. Izzy D says ever since the winter of 15-16 onward, well, he's in Lakewood, New Jersey, because you're always fighting it there because you're on the coast. Did the El Nino, so to speak, mess up the atmosphere that year? Because that was really a super off the wall El Nino. And of course, I think the year after that, we were followed by a very strong La Nina. Well, I mean, sometimes these things have memories, and you have patterns that are really really dominant. They tend to take a while for the atmosphere to kind of get it all out of the way. So there, I don't know if it's lasted as long as taking it into 4 years, uh, but I wouldn't be shocked if it had some sort of longer term impact. You have to ask a long range person about that. They'll know far more than I. And of course, here's Chuck Cardillo recalling back 1993-94 in the Catskills, 160 inches of snow he had, and he's up at about 3,000 feet.
Yeah, in fact, one of the
Not that
longest
there's anything wrong with that, by the way.
at the Mohonk Mountain House, or actually the Mohonk Preserve, which is just to the west of New Paltz, and they have Skytop Mountain just a stone's throw away. That's like 1,200 feet up. I'm not sure about the elevation of the preserve or the mountain house, but they have been keeping weather records there since 1896. And in fact, Joe, if you go at the end where Mohonk Lake is, they have a long dock. You go to the end of the dock, and there's their rain gauge, the original rain gauge from 1896.
Nice,
It's like
nice.
they have been keeping unbroken all the way back since then. And there was one case, I think, in May of 1977. New York City, had flurries on the 9th of May,
Yeah,
19.
I remember that. I
At Mohonk, it was cold enough for snow. They had over a foot of snow
That's
in
insane.
May up in the Catskills.
Here's a question for you. William Uber says it's either an inch and a quarter, a half, 3/4 of an inch. How do we measure a tenth of an inch? So if you have 3.75, he's calling it 4. You have to have I guess, a ruler that's got tenths on it.
Yeah, that's what I have here at the house. It's actually a metal yard. I ought to bring it on and just show everybody from upstairs. But it's a metal yardstick, metal, not wooden, and it's very fine. It has incremental, so that what I usually do is I just stick the yardstick in at like 10 different spots and then get the average. And I had something like 2.7 or 2.6 to 3.1. It all averaged out to 2.9. That was my final amount that I submitted to the Weather Service. And interestingly, if you go back and look at the records, you'll see Putnam Valley. I made my observation at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My first observation was like 1.9 inches. They waited until everybody else made their observations, and you look in Putnam and Westchester and Rockland County, it was like 7:38, 8:30. They're all coming in with 2.7, 2.9, 3.1. And there I am at 5 o'clock with 1.9 inches. I said, I better go out and make another observation because this looks stupid. Everybody's got threes and fours, and I had not even two. So
Savage Stuff says, what type of pattern would be needed for continuous southern track, which you have, that brings big snows into the mid-Atlantic and coastal New England? Well, it might be nice to have at least a little bit of blocking, which has really been non-existent since 2012.
right.
I mean, it pops up every once in a while. It lasts for a very short time and then it disappears. But in terms of a long-term block over an entire winter season, you really have to go back to probably the winters of 2009, 2010, and particularly and 2010 to 2011. Let's see.
This winter, by the way, Joe, this winter kind of reminds me. Of course, been watching the weather for a very long time, and for whatever reason, I have a memory
You
which
absorb it.
I absorb. Yeah, I absorbed it a lot. This winter reminds me of the winter of 82, 83, what I call a bookend winter. That year in December, no, excuse me, the winter of 81, 82.
Okay.
And in December of 81, we had a pretty big snowfall, I think in the first week of December. And then we had some piddling little storms all through the remainder of the winter. And then on April the 6th, 1982, we had a blizzard. We had like 8 to 12 inches of snow. You talk about a back-ended winter. Actually, again, this is a bookend because we had a lot of snow in the first week of December, and then all of a sudden we came right back in the first week of April and had another big storm. So we had our big storm, what, in the on December the 1st, and that dumped like 20 inches up near Albany. And we've had not really all that much to write home about since. So who knows? Maybe the end of March or early April, we just might have the big storm that everybody's waiting
Well,
for.
that's
You know,
one of the things. One of the things that since 16 has been this, and actually even probably before that, has been this sort of winter that gets extended into the month of April. We didn't have that so much last year, but the two winters before we did, and who knows, maybe this winter we may do the same thing. We'll just have to wait and see.
yeah,
Um, uh, Danilo Evangelista do severe weather season, which is a ways away yet, although you wouldn't know it by what happened not too long ago. Was it last week or a little bit before that? Will it be active, especially after last week for prices like Tornado Alley? Okay, Danilo, I would just say this. Everything that was happening with respect to the severe weather that happened in the Gulf states was driven by the deep trough that's out in the west. So you're going to need to have that come back when we get into the spring months. Right now, it's reversed. We've got the big ridge now building in the west, or will eventually be building in the west, and the Pacific North America Index, that PNA, is going to go strongly positive. Better chance, a solid pattern for severe weather to get that PNA go negative. So you get the deep trough in the west and more of the ridge in the eastern part of the United States. So that, hey, we've gone an hour. I think for a night though, there's not a whole lot of weather going on. We did an hour, and that's pretty good.
that's pretty good. Yeah.
All right, so let's call it a night. Thanks for being here, everybody. Joe and I will be back tomorrow night for another rendition of the Joe and Joe Weather Show. And appreciate the questions. We're glad we were able to get to most of them. In case we missed any, you can always message me on Facebook, and I'll try to get back to you when I get a chance, or just put it in the comments section on YouTube for this video, and I'll try and answer it there. And for those of you, I've been really kind of remiss at getting back to some of the comments. That's my next thing to do tonight, is to go on YouTube and go back and respond to the comments on the videos of the last several days. Doug Wetzel hit super chat tonight. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. And we will we'll leave it at that. Okay, so everybody have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
We'll be right back here.
Good night.
Good night.